afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the City Club Forum. My name is Herb Camm. I'm president of the City Club. Today we bring you the battle of the century, or at least the battle of the month, among four Democratic candidates for the Democratic nomination for Congress in the 19th Congressional District. This is a new district, as most of you probably know. Reaches from Bay Village in the west, goes south across Strongville and other communities along that way, finally comes up east at Wickliffe and Willowick. U-shaped, some call it the Pac-Man District, some call it the Emerald Necklace, and those of a less reverent bent refer to it as the Toilet Seat District, only because of its shape. Let me explain the ground rules for this confrontation. The names of the speaking order have been drawn by lot. Each candidate will have 6 minutes for his opening presentation. Our timekeeper at the front table here is Robert Cavano, a former president of the City Club. Following the question period, each candidate will have 2 minutes for a closing statement. Only one person, the person to whom a question is directed, may answer a question from the floor, though I reserve the right, out of fairness, to give someone else an opportunity to address that question. However, we would hope that each question would be addressed specifically to a candidate and answered by the candidate. Answers to questions will be limited to 1 minute. We will begin with a presentation by Ronald M. Mottl. The incumbent of the 23rd District is now constituted. Ron Mottl is serving his 4th term as a member of Congress. He is a former member of the City Council in Parma and a former president of the Parma Council. I now introduce to you Congressman Ronald Mottl.
Herb, I call it the Emerald Necklace. Ladies and gentlemen, fellow candidates, I welcome this opportunity to be here at the City Club Forum today to speak to the issues so important to the new 19th District. You know, it really amazes me. For years, people have heard east is east and west is west and never the twain shall meet. Well, the Ohio legislature certainly accomplished what Kipling never dreamed of. Ladies and gentlemen, I want you to know that even though this new district takes in a great stretch of geography, which includes 3 counties, Lorain, Lake, and Cuyahoga counties, I look forward to serving each community just as I have served the 23rd Congressional District. My town meetings will still be held every other month. The model poll will continue to be a guide for me in my vote. I'll still be available on weekends to see constituents in my office, and you can still reach me by telephone at my home because my number is listed in the book. As you know, my office, both here in Washington, has a track record of providing the best service, efficient, attentive service. That's a very important part of my commitment to you as a congressman. Now, I want to speak to an issue about which I feel very deeply. That is the well-being of our senior citizens. Congressman Claude Pepper, the chairman of the House Committee on Aging, who has endorsed my reelection, has said this about me, and I quote, "I also want to commend you for your outstanding work in behalf of senior citizens throughout your career in public service." I'm referring to your co-sponsoring the Ohio Constitutional Amendment for the homestead exemption, your leadership in the passage of legislation on probate reform and Blue Cross reform. Ever since you came to Congress in 1975, you have voted in the best interest of seniors. 2 excellent examples of that are your votes against Graham Latta 2, which eliminated the minimum benefit, and against the budget reconciliation bill, which hurt seniors. Your opposition to those bills is truly appreciated. I look forward to continue to work closely with you, Ron, as we work to preserve the integrity of the Social Security system and seek to increase benefits for golden agers. We can also protect the needed programs for health and human services by doing something about waste and mismanagement in the federal government. It has been estimated by highly reliable sources that as much as $30 million could be cut out of the defense budget, and the United States would still have a strong and viable national defense. I have sponsored legislation to repeal the so-called tax leasing provision by which corporations buy and sell tax credits. My bill would reduce the federal deficit by some $29 billion over the next few years by making healthy corporations pay their fair share of taxes. I have also sponsored legislation to raise another $12 billion by repealing the reduction in the oil windfall profits tax. To give you a real example how money can be earned by better management in the federal government, I discovered in my freshman year in Congress that your withheld federal tax dollars were being held by your local bank on a short-term basis and not even earning 1 cent of interest. My bill, which was signed into law in 1977, requires the U.S. Treasury to invest taxpayers' money in interest-bearing accounts. Senator Proxmire has said that our law is earning all taxpayers $500 million a year. In another attempt to eliminate government waste, it was my investigation into the VA drug scandal here in Greater Cleveland last year, which turned up 42 indictments, and we've already had 21 convictions. In my 4 terms in Congress, I've carried out a strong commitment to a better quality of life for all citizens. I believe that it is absolutely necessary to safeguard the nation's air and water by enacting strong legislation. As a member of the Energy and Commerce Committee, I was instrumental in getting the hazardous chemical waste dump site on the Cauga River near Lake Erie cleaned up to eliminate the peril it posed to our drinking water. I've demanded the Department of Energy abandon its 10-year record of futility in testing of salt formations for the storage of nuclear waste. We here in Greater Cleveland refuse to be guinea pigs for the Battelle Institute. The consumer also needs a friend in Congress. Sometimes that really means taking a leadership role in helping several communities get together to decide what to do to protect their interests when a giant monopoly like Columbia Gas starts throwing its weight around with ridiculous rate increases. With my leadership, 10 communities have formed a consortium to fight the tyranny of Columbia Gas by hiring special counsel to evaluate the feasibility of having its own gas company. And to help our most precious and vulnerable consumers, our infants, Representative Al Gore and I have had adoption of legislation to make sure that our infants would not have to eat adulterated baby formula. We mandated pre-testing of baby formulas before marketing. We doubled the nutrients and streamlined the recall procedures for the FDA. As a result of the work with the Cleveland Police Department's Auto Theft Unit, I introduced the Motor Vehicle Title Inspection Act of '82. Congressional hearings on this bill will be held on Monday, May 24th at Cleveland State University Moot Court. And my colleague, Congressman Henry Waxman of California, will be there to help chair the hearings. Auto theft costs Ohioans over $90 million. There's no easy issues, but I'm proud of the fact that no special interests control my vote, and my vote belongs to my constituents. Thank you.
Thank you, Ron. We will now hear from Arnold D. Gleisser. Mr. Gleisser is a math and science teacher at Richmond Heights High School. He is not a total stranger to politics, having run for Congress once before. Mr. Gleisser.
Thank you. It's good to be here again at the City Club of Cleveland, the citadel of free speech, where all the candidates get equal time. We in this district in the United States face some important decisions in the next several years. Are we going to have a military budget of $1.5 trillion as Feighan and Mottl advocate, or shall we spend enough to protect ourselves and use our money to better our living standards, bring energy independence for ourselves, make our industry more competitive, and eliminate unemployment? Here are some of the Mottl-Feighan projected military waste costs. $100 billion for MX missiles that will destroy Utah and Nevada and not make us any safer. $100 billion for B-1 bombers that will be obsolete by 1990. Billions for Trident submarines when only one Trident submarine with multiple atomic warheads can destroy every major and minor city in Russia. Just look at the results of our economic and military spending policies. Small business is folding at a rate unprecedented since the Great Depression. Senior citizens and Social Security are being imperiled by a proposed $40 billion reduction, and public education is in shambles. Meanwhile, the Mottl-Feighan administration wants to spend more billions on large naval ships and aircraft carriers, which a 200,000 Exocet missile can destroy. Admiral Hyman Rickover, the father of our nuclear navy, says, large warships are easy easy floating targets and won't last 2 days in warfare. I would propose instead that we spend our money for the development of a photovoltaic industry. Now, this kind of an industry would create many hundreds of thousands of jobs and give us as much electricity as 500 nuclear power plants, and it would do it safely. We could also develop a fuel alcohol industry which would create additional millions of jobs and give us energy independence. We could become the solar power OPEC of the world and be selling this non-polluting technology in the energy-starved parts of the world, and much of this could be produced right here in Cuyahoga County, and empty plants such as White Motor and Cadillac Tank Plant. Ron Mottl voted against NASA federal funding 3 times. Arnold Gleisser would choose the solar soft path and bring these jobs back to NASA by working with other technology progress-minded representatives. We now have an unfair tax system where people with incomes under $10,000 actually pay $240 more in taxes, while people with $80,000 incomes and over get a $15,000 tax refund. Is it any wonder that we're going into a big depression? Large corporations like General Electric with a profit of $2.75 billion get a tax refund of $100 million by using tax leases voted by Ron Mottl. Arnold Gleisser would work to bring back fair taxes, which would help the working and middle classes and bring back demand economics. Unfair tax breaks were given in the last Congress to representatives and voted for by Ron Mottl. These should be repealed. We need a congressman from the 19th District who will work to see that the Frost Belt in Ohio gets back its fair share of the federal tax dollar, and not congressmen like Mottl who vote billions of dollars for the Sun Belt at our expense. It's time we had a representative who reads the amendments and all the fine print on proposed legislation. At the end of World War II, the United States was one of the most loved and respected nations in the world. Now, under the Reagan-Mottl foreign policy, we are one of the most hated and feared. Latin America hates us because our administration meddles in their internal affairs. Europe hates us because our administration now believes that nuclear wars can be won and is willing to develop neutron bombs and test out this theory with Europe as the battleground. Let's put our thousands of scientists to work inventing modern technology that will help with the real problems of the world, such as energy, hunger, and human needs. Let's develop a car battery that will power electric cars 300 miles. Let's develop 256 K-RAM computers and do it right here in Cuyahoga County. If you elect Arnold Gleisser to Congress, I pledge that I shall devote all my efforts to solving our national problems and not be part of the problem. Now, I have been founder of the group called Save Our State from Radioactive Waste, and for 4 years I've been working on the law that nuclear waste should not be buried in Ohio, because there's many laws that can be written by people in and out of Congress, and unfortunately those in Congress have not always written the best of laws, so those of us at the grassroots level have to write our own laws. And we have successfully stopped this from happening, and I think one of our main problems today is the testing that Battelle plans to do at the salt mines down in the Cleveland, Whiskey Island area. Now, Mr. Keller was just at the Engineering Society saying that this would not be harmful, but it's a great danger, because for 4 years now the federal government has been trying to put nuclear waste somewhere in the Salina salt beds, and if this testing is allowed to be carried on, we are all in danger. Here's how I can be elected. If every one of my supporters will just call 7 voters in the 19th District and ask each of them to vote for me and ask each of them to call 7 more voters, then I can win on June 8th, because we don't have the funds to spend that some of the other candidates do. We're relying on people helping us at the grassroots level. So if you want to change the present distressing state of affairs, you can elect Arnold Gleisser in the 19th District, as I am the Peace and Jobs candidate. Don't forget, it's just going to take 7 phone calls to get this to work. Thank you. I'm sorry that happened. I didn't know it was there.
Thank you, Arnold. Our third speaker is Edward Feighan, presently serving on the Cuyahoga County Board of Commissioners. Ed Feighan served 3 terms in the General Assembly of the state of Ohio and ran an unsuccessful but close race against Dennis Kucinich in the contest for mayor. I now introduce to you Commissioner Edward Feighan.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Herb. Congressman Mottl, Mr. Drimmer, Mr. Gleisser, friends of the City Club. Congressional elections allow the voters to express their approval or disapproval of the course of government. This year, the congressional races will be a referendum on Reaganomics. In the new 19th Congressional District, the voters will also judge the performance of 2 public officials over the last 10 years. Ron Mottl and I represent two fundamentally different perspectives on the role of government and the responsibilities of elected office. And that is primarily why I decided not to seek re-election as a county commissioner and enter this congressional race with a veteran representative and two civic-minded educators. I'm concerned about what is happening to the United States and in our community. Choice is the essence of politics. Choice is the heart and soul of government. The choices made by this administration and its supporters have ranged from impractical to outrageous. Now, in the second year, the administration has proposed a budget proposal that is so flawed that it has been rejected by the president's closest supporters in Congress. And what has been the effects of the choices made by this administration? There's been no better vantage point from which to monitor the devastation of Reaganomics than from the Board of County Commissioners. A year and a half ago, a relatively small band of radicals took over the administration of the federal government. They set out to achieve one of the most radical redirections of public policy in this nation's history. It was no small task. To achieve their aims, they enlisted virtually every Republican member of Congress and some 30 renegade Democrats, all of whom live in southern states, all of whom except one. He lives only south of Snow Road. Through numerous legislative battles and many close votes, the radical redirection of public policy was in fact accomplished. And what exactly was accomplished? The biggest shift of tax burden in this nation's history, from those most able to pay to those least able to pay. The worst assault on the Social Security system since its enactment 47 years ago. A shifting of federal investment from domestic programs for people to defense expenditures larger than in any war this nation has fought. The result was just what the critics of Reaganomics predicted. Budgetary deficits so gigantic that businesses cannot borrow needed money at affordable rates. As a consequence, today we have businesses failing at a rate of more than 500 a week. Tens of thousands of persons living closer to destitution, retired persons worried about making ends meet, students deprived of benefits that their deceased parents earned, disabled persons, young and old, losing their entitlements. When Ronald Reagan was campaigning for the presidency, he promised great changes, and he has delivered. But things are worse, not better, and the Republicans and Democrats who chose these destructive and impractical policies seem not to see the awful results of their misguided actions. They are determined to pursue the same policies, no matter what the consequences for our national life. Millions of Americans are struggling as they have not had to struggle since the 1930s, and states, counties, and municipalities are struggling. Instead of working to reduce program expenditures to the levels that we can afford, the administration chooses to cut and slash without regard for the effects. We can bring federal spending under sensible control without ripping to shreds the fabric of our society. The administration has proposed the transfer of welfare programs to the states. I propose reformation of the entire system. Improvements are possible. Cost savings are possible. Over the past 3 years, I've worked to develop a computerized system of payments to replace the direct payment of welfare checks that we have now. This year, Cuyahoga County will be the first community in this country to use this modern system. It's a new system that will reduce costs by over $2 million in its first year of operation and will eliminate the major source of fraud in the system. While the President has closed down the agency established to reduce health care costs in this county and made deeper cuts in programs of health care for the elderly and poor children, I've undertaken a project that promises to serve as a national model, a project designed to help senior citizens stay in their own homes instead of going into institutions, reducing costs by as much as 2/3. The administration and its colleagues in Congress have taken actions that they knew would increase unemployment. We now have more than 10 million Americans out of work and dependent on unemployment insurance, welfare payments, and the meager assistance that they can get from churches, relatives, and friends. We need an employment policy in this country that does not rely on governmental assistance. One might think that this administration would also want to see workers working instead of waiting in line for free surplus cheese, general assistance payments, and unemployment insurance. We need a workfare program that trains people to fill productive jobs in business and industry, not an 18-month stint at a dead-end government job. More is at issue in this campaign than whether one of us or another of us is selected to represent this new 19th District. At issue in this campaign is whether Congress is an equal and independent branch of government that makes its own judgments about administration initiatives, or whether Congress should blindly endorse any scheme that comes its way. At issue in this campaign is whether our defense situation is so desperate that we must sacrifice the health and safety, the nutrition and education of the people of our country so that we can build larger systems of warfare. At issue in this campaign is whether the American people are going to stand for the lunacy of a $100 billion budget deficit next year and even larger deficits in the years ahead, while the domestic economy continues to collapse, while states and cities are bankrupted,
while schools are closed because there's not enough money to keep them open. The people of the new district have an important choice to make on June the 8th. On the one hand, they have a Democrat whose voting record reveals his thorough discomfort with Democratic purposes, philosophy, and practices. Or the people of the new district can choose a Democrat who will work to cure our economic ills and improve our defense capacity without destroying lifelines and safety nets and throwing the poor through the window of vulnerability. Whomever the people of the district elect will face difficult decisions in the coming Congress. Hard choices must be made. For the well-being of this country, we must make practical decisions, we must be fair, and we must be willing to find a balance between our many needs. I believe that this nation can solve its problems and do it without the degree of hardship and suffering that this administration and its supporters have imposed on so many. That is the choice the voters face. Thank you.
Thank you, Ed. Fourth candidate is Professor Melvin Drimmer, who is a professor of history for the last 10 years at Cleveland State University. I might note that Mr. Drimmer, to underscore his candidacy as a grassroots candidate, arrived for today's meeting in a one-horse shay. Because he has a sense of humor, I would like to note also that the horse did what horses normally do. After Mr. Drimmer dismounted, but this should in no wise be interpreted as a commentary on his candidacy. I introduce to you now Professor Melvin Drimmer.
Well, Herb, before I came here, I thought we were going to have a buggy scam. Our horse and wagon didn't show up, and so we took the bus. Halfway down, the horse and wagon did come. We eventually got on, and I'm glad to be here. I just want to say a couple of things before I begin. First of all, I want to thank Herb Camm, obviously in the City Club, for having us here. It's been very difficult to be a candidate. I noticed in the paper that Mr. Feighan and Mr. Mottl have raised how many hundreds of thousands of dollars for this campaign. I want to say here before all of you and my favorite lawyer, Neil Evans, who's sitting back there, that I've raised all of $200 for this election. I've spent $150, and I'm the only candidate that's in the black. So somebody was saying that, my God, if I could run a campaign with such little money, imagine what I would do and how I would save money in Washington. My name is Mel Drimmer, and I come before you as a national Democrat seeking to become part of and work in unison with the other Democrats of this district. I feel that I'm a Democrat in the tradition, and I'm proud to say, of Franklin Roosevelt, a great name in my family, and of John and Robert Kennedy of my own generation. I would be proud to be part of a delegation which includes John Glenn and Howard Metzenbaum, Louis Stokes, Mary Rose Ocar, John Seiberling, Don Pease, and Bob Szymanski. To the people of the 19th, who are now being ground under and demoralized by the policies of Ronald Reagan, I pledge to fight the dismantling of the programs which have made us a great, humane, and secure nation. I take my philosophy from John Kennedy, who warned, quote, "If a free society cannot help the many who are poor, it cannot save the few who are rich." Reagan believes the opposite. In contrast to Kennedy, he proclaims, "If you cannot help the few who are rich, you cannot save the many who are poor." I do not subscribe to the Reagan philosophy. What is the major issue in this race? It is the record, of course, of Congressman Ron Mottl. For the first time since he was elected in 1974, Mr. Mottl has had to come before the Democratic voters to be seriously judged. And he is running in a district that has been represented with great distinction for years by the noted liberal Democrat Charles Vanek. Mr. Mottl now asks us Democrats for our endorsement. What does he want us to endorse? As Democrats, does he want us to endorse his support of Ronald Reagan? As Democrats, does he want us to endorse Reagan's destruction of the democratically inspired social programs? As Democrats, Does he want us to endorse voodoo economics, which in order to curb inflation has left millions laid off and left businessmen near or in bankruptcy? As Democrats, does he want us to endorse his war against the aged, the sick, the poor, and the widows who desperately need, and in Palmer especially, public housing facilities? And as Democrats, the great society of civil rights, does he want us to endorse his war against black children with his Mottl constitutional amendment, as he styles it, against busing, an issue which is without relevance in the 19th Congressional District and which would have been so in the city of Cleveland if that school system over the years had not systematically reinforced segregation under the leadership of Paul Briggs. Mr. Mottl sees his campaign against busing and open housing as a battle of community control. That is just what they said in the South in the 1960s when I took part in the civil rights movement. But we know that it is nothing more than old-fashioned Jim Crow, given a new name and new clothes, and spoken with a northern accent. Mr. Mottl is a man of considerable charm, intellect, and character. I like him, for like myself, he is a man of passion and concern for people and ideas. But is this the best way to use his time? I do not think so. With Palmer losing 174 teachers, 1/4 of its school system, with losses of jobs, losses of population, Mr. Mottl has wasted his time and our money by spending most of his time in Washington in his effort in his war against the blacks and the poor. I think that we in the 19th District deserve better. What do I stand for? I'm for nuclear freeze. I'm for Senator Ted Kennedy's gun control legislation. I'm for ERA. I'm for a rational and sensible defense policy as advocated by Gary Hart. I am for restoration of social cuts. I support the programs of the Sierra Club. I support the NEA. I support a massive public works program. I'm for fair taxation. I am for support of Israel. I am for a human rights movement, a strong support for a human rights movement and support of solidarity. I'm for justice in Northern Ireland and for the British to stop their war, 300 years war against the Irish Catholic population. I'm for rehiring of the air traffic controllers, and I'm for against tampering with the Constitution in respects to school prayers and abortion. John F. Kennedy, in announcing himself a candidate in 1960, said words that I endorse and I feel appropriate in evaluating me. He said, quote, "It is time for a new generation of leadership to cope with new problems and new opportunities, for there is a new world to be won. I seek your support so that together we can rekindle the American dream and bring about an America we can once again be proud of, an America that is humane, just, caring, and committed."
Thank you, Professor Drimmer. Thank you, Professor Drimmer, and thank you, gentlemen, all. We'll have our question and answer session in just a moment, ladies and gentlemen. Permit me to take a few moments to make some important announcements, if you will. Starting this coming week and continuing for 4 consecutive weeks, we shall be showing at various times the videotape seminar series we have produced on the subject, Must the Nuclear Age Bring Nuclear War? This is a 4-part series, with the first part being a rerun of Dr. Helen Caldicott's City Club speech of a year ago on the medical implications of nuclear war. Now, many of you have asked about this, and you now have an opportunity to see a tape of this address at the following times: next Tuesday at noon, Tuesday afternoon at 5, next Friday before the forum at 11:30, and next Friday after the forum at 11:30. That's the Helen Caldicott speech on the nuclear situation. Next week, our forum program will be another important political debate, this time bringing together the candidates for the Republican nomination for governor: Clarence Brown, Seth Taft, Robert Teeter, and Thomas Van Meter. I would suggest that early reservations once again be made. Now for the question and answer session. Alan Davis, our executive director, is in the forward part of the room. Bob Conrad at the rear. A question must be directed to a specific candidate, I remind you, ladies and gentlemen, and answers, gentlemen, participating in the debate, answers will be limited by Bob Cavano, the timekeeper, to 1 minute each. Raise your hand, please, to be recognized.
Mr. Chairman, before we go along, I want to ask one question of all four candidates. One question. Will you support the winner of the Democratic nomination?
Will each of the candidates support the winner of this contest? Mr. Drimmer?
No.
Mr. Congressman Mottl? Yes. Mr. Gleisser? Yes. Mr. Feighan?
Well, unfortunately, the possibility exists of having two Republicans in the general, so I don't think we'll have a Democrat under one circumstance.
Commissioner Feighan, correct me if I'm wrong, but there's a very crucial issue that I haven't heard in the debate, and that's Central America. What is your position on military aid to El Salvador? What is your position on the administration's policy with Guatemala, Nicaragua, Honduras, and Cuba?
Unfortunately, throughout the course of this campaign, there's not been a considerable amount of debate about foreign policy as well. There should be because of the obvious importance of that discussion itself, but because it does separate the candidates in the race. I think it's important that we maintain a very strong presence in Central America. I think that this administration has been pursuing a haphazard policy. I think that the Caribbean Basin policy of the current administration ignores the fact that the Caribbean islands are really one set of countries that have their own internal and external problems, and that the countries of Central America are yet another problem. To group them all into the same Caribbean Basin policy it can only lead to further conflict. I think that we have to withdraw any economic assistance or military assistance to El Salvador if, in fact, there is an effort to repeal some of the agrarian reforms, as was reported in this morning's paper. And I would certainly support the Senate's action to withdraw that. I think, though, in the area of foreign policy, just to expand that the public should know that Ron Mottl has voted against every foreign aid bill in his 8 years in the Congress.
This is also directed to Mr. Feighan. Mr. Feighan, this is rather an impertinent question, but at the same time a pertinent one.
I'll be the judge of that.
Who are you going to vote for Congress in the 19th District in the primary?
Well, it's the most impertinent question that you could raise, of course. I do not currently live in the 19th District, as I'm sure you knew when you asked the question. This is Cuyahoga County and a portion of Lake County, new congressional district. There are some 300,000 new residents of this congressional district, and based on the behavior of the state legislature in drawing this district, it's almost a miracle that Ron Mottl lives in the district.
Mr. Feighan, another question. Mr. Feighan, there are two types of congressmen, really. There's the type of congressman who usually stays in his office and becomes an expert at constituent services. And there's the other type of congressman who basically stays on the floor a lot, learns the ropes, and becomes a member, more or less, of the club. One of the more respected people, someone who's really in with the speaker. What type of congressman do you wish to become if you are elected?
I think that a member of Congress can accomplish both the goals of having the respect of his or her colleagues, as well as providing outstanding leadership back home in the home district and in the community that that person is from, and as well as providing the outstanding constituent service. I don't think that they're at all inseparable, and I think that we have had from this community members of the United States Congress who have provided that kind of service and who have provided that kind of leadership. I have a legislative background, and I am proud to stand on this forum today and have the support of virtually every member of the state legislative delegation, House and Senate, who has worked with me over the course of my legislative career. And I think that that kind of respect is important to have, and I think that both can be blended.
I have a question for Mr. Congressman Mottl. Congressman, in your address, you indicated that you were opposed to plans to bury nuclear waste in the salt beds off of Cleveland. Are we to presume from those remarks that you are opposed to any further licensing of nuclear power plants? Are we to assume from those remarks that you would favor shutting down existing nuclear power plants? If not, given the fact that as long as a nuclear power plant is going to produce radioactive waste, what plan do you support for disposal of nuclear waste?
I do not support the closing of the present nuclear plants or those that are in process of being built. It would be a financial disaster to do that for the people that would purchase electricity, for the consumers. But I feel that we should go slow with nuclear power. I've never been a strong proponent of nuclear power. I feel that we have to have further study for the storage, but I don't believe it should be in the salt mines, and it's not going to be in the salt mines beneath Lake Erie. I feel that the administration is insisting through the Battelle Institute that we have testing here, but it's my fear that if we have testing and it's successful, that whether it be this administration or succeeding administrations, then this will be a possible site for the storage of nuclear waste, and we're not going to allow that to jeopardize our drinking water here beneath Lake Erie. Thank you.
Mottl, in June of 1981, you addressed the City Club, and you stated, I quote, "Before Americans are quick to criticize Reagan's programs, we should ask ourselves whether any other approach has worked." Do you still defend that statement in terms of the unemployed and the elderly?
I believe what we have to do to get this country moving again is several things. One, the President and also the Congress has to agitate and jawbone that Mr. Volker should either tender his resignation or he should bring down the interest rates dramatically forthwith. Secondly, we have to say to Japan, you're either going to be an equal trading partner with the United States or we're not going to trade with you at all. We got to tell Japan that we won the Second World War, that we have to get tough with Japan. We're not going to allow them to put our people out of work over here. This is what's being done. We supply their national defense. They spend 1% of their gross national product on defense. We spend 6%. We supply their national defense, and they dump their products over here to put our people out of work. This policy has to come to an end, and we have to bring the interest rates down forthwith. Thank you.
To Mr. Feighan, please. The Kennedy-Hatfield bill is clearly the closest proposal to the grassroots nuclear freeze movement that's sweeping through the country. What will be your position with respect to that bill?
I support the Kennedy-Hatfield proposal for the nuclear freeze. I think it would give this country a very sane nuclear weapons policy. But I don't think we can do that alone. I would urge ratification of the SALT II agreements. I honestly believe that the SALT II agreements are the best agreements with respect to reduction of all nuclear weaponry that we could negotiate at this time. And I think that the questions that many people had, Senator Glenn was probably one of the most vocal questioners of verification opportunities under SALT II, those questioners have now conceded that, in fact, we do have that verification capability.
Congressman Mottl, why are you a Democrat?
I've been proud to be a Democrat for many years, and I've always run in the Democratic primary because the Democratic Party does more things for more people. You know, it's important to realize that Boss Hagan has put his candidate, Mr. Feighan, to run against me at this time. But what happened? Boss Hagan was the first one to invite Mr. Kennedy to challenge Jimmy Carter, an incumbent Democratic president. This contributed to President Carter's defeat more than any other incident. So I can say that I'm proud to be a Democrat. I'll always run as a Democrat, but I don't know if Boss Feighan, who has contributed to the defeat of a Democratic president, can say that he's a true Democrat.
I just have a short question for Mr. Mottl. Mr. Mottl, I was wondering if you could explain why organized labor has so far been so opposed to your reelection.
Well, I think it basically stems to Marty Hughes. See, AT&T and Ohio Bell is very disturbed with me because I'm trying to protect the residential consumer from doubling or tripling their rates, because I'm looking out for the best interest of the residential consumer. So I'm co-sponsor of a bill, 5158, which AT&T has spent $2 million in which to defeat this legislation, because it'll be imperative with the present settlement as proffered by AT&T that the parent company, Long Lines AT&T, gets all the cream, and the subsidies that have been traditional to subsidize the residential consumer, that is the excess charge and Yellow Pages revenue, will not continue to subsidize the residential consumer. This will make it imperative that Ohio Bell will have to run down to Columbus and the PUCO and get a substantial increase in rates, double or triple the rates. Our senior citizens will not be able to have a telephone. Our average income people will not be able to have a telephone.
That's a lie, Mr. Chairman. That man has lied to people here today.
Congressman Mottl, please. Where can I read of your support for the renomination of Senator Metzenbaum?
I'm an enthusiastic supporter of Howard Metzenbaum for renomination. Delighted support. I think he's done a good job, as I have done a good job for the consumer, whether it be with Columbia Gas or with AT&T or any of the utilities. I've always vigorously opposed the decontrol of oil, as Senator Metzenbaum has done. I've introduced legislation to keep regulation on natural gas and to disallow FERC, the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, through the back door to increase the price on old gas. So I'm an enthusiastic supporter of Senator Metzenbaum because he fights for the consumer, just like the representative from the old 23rd and the new representative from the 19th District, yours truly.
Question for Professor Drimmer. Could you clarify the differences in your point of view and that of Mr. Feighan, and where the distinctions might be and why one might be, if making a choice between the two of you, might choose you as opposed to Mr. Feighan?
Thank you. That's a good question. A lot of people have asked that. I don't want to be known just as another pretty face. Let me say this. I think that Ed has run a good race, and I praised him. I came to Lakewood, and we spoke. And by the way, I just want to say that Ed and I came out to Palmer, and we were very nicely greeted by the Palmer Democrats. I came out to Lakewood, and I was very nicely treated by the Lakewood Democrats. I was disappointed that Mr. Mottl didn't come. I think he should have come and faced the Lakewood Democrats. And I did say that Ed has, I think, highlighted the issue of jobs. I think the difference between me and Ed is, first of all, I think I'm, in the sense of I can be modest, I think I'm more articulate on some of the issues than he is. But that might be both good and bad. But I don't think we should run, and I was very glad, by the way, I did like his speech this afternoon. I did notice that for the first time that I heard him, he basically included more issues. The thing that struck me about speaking in Lakewood a few weeks ago was the fact that when I went through this whole list of answers, the people basically gave me a good reception. And what it showed me was that people are not only concerned about jobs, they're concerned with a whole host of issues. And I think of the two candidates, I'm basically concerned with a much larger spectrum of our concerns than Ed.
A question for Ed Feighan. Can you hear me yet? We have a national debt of over $1 trillion, and that's just what they acknowledge at this point. And I was wondering, number one, A, how did you think we got to that point? And B, if you're elected, what would you do about it, if anything?
Well, interestingly enough, we had from an administration that ran on the platform of balancing the federal budget and eliminating the national debt, presented us with the largest budget deficit in the history of this country. That is translated into very real terms by this example. If we continue to have a $110 billion deficit in the proposed 1983 budget, every man, woman, and child in this country next year is going to be paying $560 in taxes just for the payment of interest on that debt. There are two major sources of reduction. First, the defense appropriation. We have an administration that has proposed $240 billion increase in defense appropriations over a 4-year period. In addition to that, we have a tax cut that was grossly inequitable. I agree with David Stockman's analysis of the tax cut that it was nothing but a Trojan horse to bring down the upper brackets of the wealthiest in this country. By readjusting the tax cut and by reducing substantially the defense appropriations, we could cut, I believe, for the next fiscal year, the federal deficit to $60 billion and pare it down years thereafter.
Gentlemen, are there any of the candidates for the 19th District interested or have any suggestions to straighten out the problems that are facing the aviation industry today? And the one reference was made to it, but I feel that this is a very important issue for everyone. I'd like to hear someone's comments.
Ms. Okar and I, last week, helped beat back a Larry Wynn, the congressman from Kansas, amendment that would have cut anywhere from $30 to $35 million from NASA's appropriation. It's important that Lewis Research Center stay alive and viable. Ms. Okar and I worked very hard to defeat the Wynn amendment by approximately 25 votes. It's important that we keep Lewis here viable, not only for the aeronautics industry, which we want to stay #1, but also for important R&D with regards to energy. I think Lewis has made great contributions to this country in research and development, and we want to keep this country #1 with aeronautics and also the automobile industry. You see, foreign imports are killing us. We've got to make sure that the funding is there as necessary for NASA and particularly Lewis Research Center.
What we also have to do at NASA is get the business community constructing some industry that will take advantage of the research that they're doing out there. They've done a lot of work with solar power, they've done a lot of work with photovoltaics, with new energy sources, with new types of engines, but Cleveland industry hasn't done anything to take advantage of that. I'd like to give you an example. The wind generators were developed at NASA, and yet they're being produced at Hamilton Standard in Connecticut. Now this is the kind of industry that should have been brought here. We have a large machine tool industry. We have many people that are unemployed with skills who could take advantage of this kind of production, and yet we're not doing anything about it. And I think this is a challenge for all of us.
Our time, unfortunately, for questions from the audience has run out. We will now go to our summations, and I think it's only fair that we have these summaries delivered in reverse order of the opening addresses. So we will hear first from Professor Melvin Drimmer on your 2-minute summation, please.
Thanks, Herb. I want to take a few seconds from my summation. I think I pretty much stated where I stand. I think you know where I stand on a number of things. I want to thank, first of all, a couple of people who have helped me on the campaign, a couple of former students of mine at Cleveland State, Paul McNamee and Paul Narrad. You're sitting back there. Paul, why don't one of the two Pauls get up? Come on. Let's give them a round of applause. Let me say this, that I want to go back to Congressman Mottl's record. I almost sound like Joe McCarthy here. I have in my hand the Lake County News Herald, May 9th, 1982, page 816. And what they did was they compared the voting records of all the congressmen from this part of the country and gave them different ratings. And this is what we found. The ADA gave Eckert 80 approval rate, a rate of 80 approval rate, Okar 55, Stokes 90%, Mottl 20%, Glenn 80%, Metzenbaum 85. National Education Association, Eckert 100, Okar 100, Stokes 100, Mottl 33, Glenn 100, and Howard Metzenbaum 75. The AFL-CIO, Eckert got a 67% rating, Okar 83, Stokes 100, Mottl 33%, Glenn 88%, Metzenbaum 100. And the American Conservative Union, representing the most conservative interests in America, gave Eckert 15%, Okar 7%, Stokes 0, Mottl 73%, John Glenn 7%, and Metzenbaum 0. And that is the record.
Thanks, Herb. Mel Drimmer's done a great job of helping to focus a lot of the issues in this campaign. I wish that the campaign, that's now only 6 or 7 weeks old, had reached some of the heights that it has today. Unfortunately, a lot of the discussion has been less than lofty, and I was somewhat chagrined yesterday when I read in the paper, a reporter indicated that Congressman Mottl had supported my campaign for county commissioner, and that he had contributed $50 to my campaign last year and wanted his money back. And for reasons that I can understand, and I want everyone to know that I'm here today to present Ron Mottl with a check for $59. $50 is reimbursement, and $9 representing the 18% interest that this money would have garnered under the economic policies that he supported over the past year. I want to conclude. It's very difficult in such a short period of time. I thought I'd get away with it. That's trust. It's very difficult, with a minute left, to highlight any more issues. But what I would like to do is close with a framework, because there's been a great deal of discussion today and over the past couple of years about the responsibility of different levels of government. And I think it's best said by Archibald MacLeish, who said it 20 years ago, but it's even more poignant today. We talk as though the great question before our society is whether the things that need to be done in America to keep this last best hope of Earth alive should be done by the federal government or by the states or perhaps by the cities or by industries or by some kind of organization. The question before our society is simply whether or not those things will be done. Thank you all very much.
I'd like to take some time here to agree with some of my opponents. Ed Feighan has been accusing Ron Mottl of a lot of mistakes and problems in his voting record, and Ron Mottl has been saying Ed Feighan did not do a good job when he was a representative. Well, I agree with them both. Now, the fortunate thing about this campaign is those of you that agree with them both have another choice. You can vote for Gleisser if you live in the 19th District. And if you don't live there, you can at least get your friends and relatives to and your neighbors. Now, our campaign made a tour of trouble spots in Cuyahoga County, and we had some very definite suggestions of how we can improve Cuyahoga County. Because one important thing is a congressman should be out there trying to improve our way of life and our standard of living and make it a United States and District 19 a better place to live. I just wanted to give you a quick rundown of what we did and what we recommended on our tour. Our first place we visited was Might Motor Company. Now, this plant, which has employed many thousands of people in Greater Cleveland over the years, is now closed, and it's unfortunate. That plant should be reopened. It should be making fuel-efficient cars, trucks, and buses. Then we went to Blue Cross. Now, Blue Cross under Medifil has just given a 37% increase to our senior citizens. And this is unconscionable, and the federal government should be involved in this, and we should be keeping these rates down because they're faced with rising utility bills and all kinds of other costs. We went to the federal building because we protested the idea that there's too much money being spent on military weapons, which I mentioned in my original talk. We visited Whiskey Island. We went to Edgewater Park because we're quite concerned about the quality of water pollution. We definitely want this cut. And with somebody like Ann Gorsuch in charge, we're not going to get that. So we have to get rid of Ann Gorsuch from EPA, and we have to get rid of James Watt. Then we ate a Reagan model depression lunch. We had cheese, crackers, ketchup, and apples. Now, we then visited other factories. For instance, we went to Cadillac tank plant, which has been empty. We'd like to see new technology there. Thank you.
As I complete my fourth term in the United States Congress and assess the future, one word comes to mind as a significant advantage for the constituents that I serve, and that is seniority. I remember how much I was able to do when I just started out and how that compares to my present position. As a senior member of the Veterans Affairs Committee, I chair the subcommittee on hospitals and health care, which has jurisdiction over a $7.5 billion health care network. I am one seat away from chairing the full Veterans Affairs Committee, which has jurisdiction over the VA's more than $25 billion budget. My seniority is extremely important to the more than 300,000 veterans in the 3 counties served by the 19th Congressional District. My subcommittee chairmanship, to name just one instance, brought Greater Cleveland some 25 federal jobs with an annual payroll of over $400,000 and residual impact on the local economy of $1.4 million a year with the establishment of the VA Regional Medical Education Center at Brecksville. As I have worked with the respected medical leaders in the VA hospitals here in Cleveland, I've been increasingly impressed with the opportunity Cleveland has to become an international healthcare center. We have here in the greater Cleveland area all of the elements for providing the most sophisticated, advanced medical treatment available anywhere in the world today. I've been working with the Cleveland Clinic with the goal of establishing a national medical mark here in the greater Cleveland area, which would employ 1,500 people. I think the most important key in the process of economic revitalization is our commitment to work together. The West Side must work with the East Side. The city must work with the suburbs. We must look toward a new economic horizons, and together we shall not fail. Thank you, everybody.
Thank all of you, gentlemen. Thanks to all of you. Let me remind you, ladies and gentlemen, that a television tape of this entire proceeding will be seen on WVIZ Channel 25 at 5 p.m. Saturday, at 11:30 a.m. Sunday on Channel 8. You will be able to witness a debate among these 4 candidates that was taped this morning, and I commend both of these programs to you. Thank you for joining us today. The City Club Forum is adjourned.